Before we begin Unit 25, here is the answer to the Unit 24 question. The best answer is choice D.
Particles can be removed using high-efficiency particulate arrestants or HEPA filtration systems. These devices use filters to physically screen out the pollutant particles. Devices known as electrostatic precipitators can also remove particulate air contaminants by charging them electrically and then collecting them on oppositely charged plates. Since gases can pass right through filters and normally cannot be charged, HEPA or electrostatic systems do not work when dealing with VOCs or other gaseous contaminants. Instead, chemicals are used that adsorb or chemically combine with the pollutants in devices called scrubbers. There are both wet, using water, and dry, using chemical systems. All of these particle and gas cleaning systems can be very effective at removing high percentages of contaminants. However, preventing pollution before it happens is obviously the most effective solution to the problem and can be accomplished by making engineering changes to existing designs or implementing new operational procedures to reduce emissions. Unit 25, Changes in the Air.
You've probably heard a lot about global warming, or more appropriately termed, climate change.
In order to completely understand this topic, it's important to remember that climate is the average weather conditions for a particular region, and that organisms live where they do because of the climate associated with their particular biome.
If their climates change, plants and animals may no longer be suited for the new environmental conditions.
There are certain gases that cause the atmosphere to act like a huge greenhouse. They warm the earth by preventing sunlight that has been transformed into thermal energy from escaping back into space.
This is known as the greenhouse effect because the process is similar to the manner in which glass allows sunlight to enter the structure as electromagnetic radiation, but after the transition to thermal energy, prevents the heat from escaping.
Without the greenhouse effect, the Earth would experience extreme differences in temperature and life may have never evolved.
The gases that allow the greenhouse effect to occur include water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and dinitrogen monoxide.
When sunlight strikes the Earth, its energy causes the molecules of these greenhouse gases to vibrate, and just like when you rub your hands to keep warm, the friction caused by these vibrating molecules results in heat that warms the atmosphere.
If the greenhouse effect is essential for life on Earth, what's all the fuss about?
A few hundred years ago, humans began to burn fossil fuels as their primary energy source. This was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution.
Ever since then, our species has been releasing huge and unnatural amounts of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere.
This process is occurring at the same time that our species is reducing the Earth's ability to remove or transform these gases.
By analyzing and comparing air bubbles trapped in ancient glaciers, scientists have been able to determine the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases dating back hundreds of thousands of years.
Although there has been a cyclical pattern associated with atmospheric concentrations of these gases, there has been a drastic spike in their levels over the last few centuries.
In fact, carbon dioxide levels have never been as high as they are today.
Scientists have been able to conclude that there is a definite correlation between increasing carbon dioxide levels and the average surface temperature of the Earth.
Climates around the world are changing at unnaturally accelerated rates.
As you learned from our discussions pertaining to natural selection, species would have had the opportunity to evolve if the changes occurred naturally over tens of thousands of years.
Unfortunately, in only a few centuries, human activity is shifting the climate patterns of the world, and species simply do not have enough time to adapt.
We are already seeing many of the first signs of major climate shifts.
For example, species are migrating at different times of the year, moving into unfamiliar habitats, and in some cases, disappearing altogether from their ecosystems.
Major cities and communities that depend on reliable water runoff are experiencing drought and face critical water shortage problems, while others are dealing with unprecedented wildfires in their dry seasons.
The polar regions are losing ice so rapidly that polar bears and other species that rely on these frozen habitats are threatened.
As the world loses more and more ice, sea levels are rising. Some island nations have already had to relocate their people due to this phenomenon.
Scientists are also concerned that the melting ice will cause changes in water salinity, resulting in major shifts in oceanic circulation patterns.
Since ocean temperatures have a major meteorological impact on nearby land, a disruption in circulation currents can cause an immediate climate change for a given area.
The warming of permafrost regions further compounds the problem by releasing large amounts of methane.
This brief synopsis only scratches the surface of the climate-related problems we are facing as a global community.
It's unfortunate that for social, economic, and political reasons, some people are choosing to ignore and even trying to discredit the science that explains and proves climate change.
Reductions in greenhouse gas emissions would mean a significant economic sacrifice for all societies, since the fossil fuel industry would need to be replaced with one that relies on renewable energy sources.
Solving the climate change problem will require cuts in fossil fuel use, improvements in energy efficiency, shifts to renewable resources, reduction in deforestation, taxes for greenhouse gas emissions, and population control.
This is a lot to ask, and ambitious politicians have taken advantage of people's desire to keep living the good life by claiming that climate change is a hoax.
At the 2016 Paris Accord, countries of the world agreed to take the first steps in a global movement to address climate change.
Participating countries have pledged to place the welfare of the global community above their own economic interests.
Only time will tell if the countries forging this agreement have the wisdom, fortitude, and courage to keep and follow through on their words.
For those of you who may be thinking that the world may never be able to agree to such sweeping changes, think again.
In the 1970s, the world faced a similar problem as our protective ozone layer was becoming depleted.
Fortunately, people responded immediately and rose to the challenge.
A few short decades ago, it was discovered that substances known as chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, relatively inexpensive chemicals used in aerosols, air conditioners, refrigerators, and other everyday products, were destroying the stratospheric ozone layer.
If you recall, the ozone layer protects all life from the sun's harmful ultraviolet radiation.
This was a huge problem, as ozone depletion leads to sunburns, eye cataracts, immune system suppression, degradation of food crops and forests, disruption in food webs and ecosystems, and air pollution.
Simply stated, without the ozone layer, our species, along with many others, would probably go extinct.
Once people realized that there existed feasible and adequate substitutes for chlorofluorocarbons, all they had to do was stop using the CFCs and transition to the alternative substances.
Countries around the world agreed to immediately ban CFC use, and stratospheric ozone began to make a recovery.
Although ozone levels have not yet returned to those of the early 1900s, it's estimated that the ozone layer will eventually make a full recovery as long as CFC bans remain in effect.
Humans set a potential catastrophe in motion, but used their technology and resolve as a global community to turn the ozone crisis into one of our species' greatest achievements.
Hopefully people will someday say the same about the climate crisis. However, this time we now face a greater challenge.
The solution to the ozone crisis did not pose a seemingly insurmountable inconvenience to our normal way of life, and our obsession with economic growth will almost certainly get in the way.
We were able to replace CFCs with equally effective and economically viable substitutes, so few stood to lose anything by transitioning to the alternative chemicals.
Although a transition to renewable energy promises economic prosperity on the national and global scale, some politically influential and economically powerful individuals stand to lose a lot of money in the move.
Most scientists feel that we may still be able to avoid the worst effects of climate change if all of the countries follow through on what they agreed to at the Paris Accord.
There is, however, a very dark alternative to consider.
Unlike all species that act purely on survival instinct, humans are capable of consciously making decisions that are not necessarily in their best interest.
Imagine what would have happened if people decided to ignore the CFC issue and we destroyed the ozone layer.
Is it possible that humans will decide to ignore climate change and become the only species to have ever willingly chosen its own extinction? Here's your question for Unit 25.
Which of the following statements is false?
Choice A. If their climates change, plants and animals may no longer be suited for the new environmental conditions.
Choice B. Politicians have recently been able to scientifically prove that climate change is a hoax.
Choice C. Scientists have been able to conclude that carbon dioxide levels have never been as high as they are today, and that there is a definite correlation between the increase in carbon dioxide levels and the average surface temperature of the Earth.
Or choice D. In only a few centuries, human activity is shifting the climate patterns of the world?
The answer and explanation are provided at the beginning of Unit 26.